It's time for another Dice Tower review with Tim Jennette.
Hey, this is Tim Jennette, the Metal Meeple, and in this video we're taking a look at Folklore The Affliction, published by Greenbrier Games in 2017. It's for 1 to 5 players, takes between 90 and 120 minutes, and it was designed by Nick Blaine and Will Donovan. Now, Folklore, if you're familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, this is a very RPG-ish setup. You know, it's not like a Descent and things like that where you're playing a scenario that you have a little story and you have to do some objectives. This is almost like a mini RPG where, other than role-playing, your characters are doing everything else. You move around on a world map, you're going into all these little battles, you're choosing your own adventure as the story progresses. Let me kind of breeze through the overview of the game. I can't show you all the rules, obviously, but then we'll come back and I'll tell you what I think. Now, I'm not going to go over every rule, but I am going to show you pretty much what you need to get an idea of the game. To start, each player is going to choose a character. And this character is what you're going to play throughout all the stories, and you're going to gather equipment and things like that and take it from one story to the next. The first thing you're going to get is this booklet here, which is pretty much going to show you what the background of your character is. You're going to choose one of these two focuses, which you want to pick the one that matches your playstyle or whatever matches the best makeup for your group that you're playing with. You will never get the other focus. So next time you play, you're going to continue to keep, like if you choose Explorer, you're going to stay with that ability forever, basically. The inside has your starting cards of your abilities and your equipment, maybe some items. And you have these location extras. When you run around on this world map to these 3 cities, you actually get to do the general stuff, plus each character has their own set of things they can do that only they can do. Now, as you gain experience in the game, it's called lore, and once you break thresholds here, so once you get 100 experience or lore, you get to choose +1 to any stat or +2 maximum vita. Vita is health. You also get some ability points in which you can go back to this Church of the Crossroads and actually purchase new ability cards. Now, the basic character sheet here has a couple of different stats. 1, you have vita, and then 2, you have power points. This is basically your health and mana, and that's tracked when you have your board on the card on the table. You can track it using these markers. You can see this little arrow over the right here, this little red arrow. You can put it to 23, and over here you can match up with your power points. Everything in this game, combat-wise, is dealt with when you roll 2 10-sided dice, and that's going to equal a percent. You can see here where you have a, if you roll this, and I rolled let's just say I didn't roll that, a 60 and a 3. That would be 63% basically. And it has to equal or exceed the target's defense. When you roll to hit, you're going to gain a might bonus, which is basically a to-hit bonus that adds to that die roll. And you equal or exceed the defense of your target. And if you do, you do damage. You can see here you have a damage bonus, plus you would get damage bonus for any of your cards and stuff like that. Your stride value is how far your character can move when you're doing miniature combat, and also how far you'll be able to move on this map here. Then you have some skills, so anytime there's a test that happens, you're simply going to roll a d10, and you have to equal or exceed the value of the test. So if it says trickery 6, you would need a 6+. However, this character would get +1 to that roll. Over here you have a permanent ability that this character can't be immobilized. You have some keywords, so when you're purchasing abilities from the ability deck, you actually can choose any of the abilities that have that keyword in it. And you can see there's quite a bit of abilities in the game, and I do still have some of them set aside for the different characters as we're playing the story, so there's even more. And you can see here it has the starting stuff or whatever. And then this mystical knowledge, there are rituals and prayers. And basically, these are spells, and you get these, and you can cast these, and once they're successful, they're discarded. Now, this right here is the world map, and this is really what your character is going to be running around on. You don't really have a point to go anywhere specifically unless the storybook tells you to. Now, in this storybook, you can see there's plenty of pages here to go through, and I'm not going to show you much because I don't want to spoil any of the stories. But for instance, chapter 1, which is basically a tutorial, it will say, here's some story, and then, roll a skill check. So in this case, everybody has to do some sort of skill check, and a speech of 8, and if you succeed or fail, this is what happens. And sometimes it won't tell you what the succeed or fail does. You actually have to look it up in the back here to see. Now, as you're going through this, it's going to tell you to go to certain locations. For instance, if it tells you this is your party icon, let's say you start at this city right here, and you need to move to this city right here because of the story telling you so. You're going to first give the one player this token here, and this represents what player's turn it is. They're the leader for that turn. That player is going to move the party token equal distance to their stride value. So say that character's stride is a 3, he can simply go 1, 2, 3 for 3 spaces on the board. And then at the end of the movement, one of 2 cards are going to be drawn. If you're on a road space, you're going to draw from this road deck, this road event deck. You can see there's plenty here. And depending on the token is day or night, typically when you're leaving a city, it's going to be day. And then after this player's turn, it's going to switch to the night side. That player is simply going to draw one of these road events, and they're going to read either the day side or the night side. You really don't want to read both, so that when this card comes back up later, it might come up with the other selection. But, you know, this might happen or this might happen. We put them on the bottom upside down so we can try to burn through them without going through the same ones each time. So anyway, if you happen to move, when that character is done, they're going to flip this over to the night side and give it to the next player. That player is then going to control the party token and move as well. Now, obviously, the team wants to talk about this or whatnot, but they ultimately have the decision on where they want to go. So say they go 1, 2, 3 and go off-road, because maybe they want to cut through this off-road to go up to this up here, this city up here, rather than going all the way on this route. You can see how many turns it might take you if you got a 3 or 4 stride. In this case, anytime you go off-road, your turn's going to end, and you're going to draw from this off-road event deck. Now, this off-road event deck has a card on top, so you can't read the top card, but essentially you will read this and you have a choice. And on the back, it's actually going to have the outcomes of each choice, but you don't get to read that first. You have to make a decision before you do so. The problem is when you go off-road, there's a lot of times going to be a combat and things like that. And there's 2 different types of combat. You have skirmishes and you have encounters. Skirmishes are made to go really quick. You can see all the different characters in the game and the bosses, which are called afflictions are on the bottom. Anyway, say this restless spirit, and we're going to fight him as a skirmish. We would use the skirmish side of the board here where it says skirmish, and then simply, depending on the number of players, you would generate how many hit points it has, and you would put the token down here. Say we rolled and we had 6. It would get +5 defense, +5 might. It has a skirmish power up here, and there's 4 different difficulties to the game, so whichever one you're playing, you would also adjust with this. You have a defense value that you need equal or exceed, and then coins. And basically, during a skirmish, there's no miniature combat. Simply what will happen is each player will have this attack or defend token. You assign which one you want. When you choose defend, you get -10 might, but +10 defense. Attack simply is nothing special. Once that happens, the bad guy is going to roll to hit. He'll roll the 2d6, or I'm sorry, the percentile dice, get any might bonuses from the difficulty and this, and then add it together. And then for every character it equals or exceeds, they're going to be hit by this skirmish power. This one, is just if the total attack roll of the restless spirit is 80+, lose d6 hit points. Otherwise, you're going to lose d4. After that has happened, all the players will roll pretty much simultaneously. There's no real turns right here. And then for every hit, once somebody rolls plus their might and equals or exceeds 42, they'll do a point of damage and the skirmish token goes down. And then if he's not dead by the time all the players have went, then you would do the exact same process over and over until either all the players are dead or this character has been eliminated. And at that point, you would get coins. Every single player gets 6 coins. And that would be the end of the skirmish. Now, obviously, the skirmishes are meant to be really quick. They're not meant to take up a lot of time because, there's no sense of setting up a huge board just to have a fight with one little dude. So, when you get to a place that you might go, or need to go, the story manual will sometimes tell you to set up one of the boards to actually have an encounter on. When this happens, it's going to tell you to sometimes put these little search tokens down. Maybe there's one here and here, or on this well. And then maybe there's a door, and you would put the door, and there could be a skill check that you need to open this door. And then you would place miniatures out, just to show you some of the miniatures here. Pretty cool. Let's put this here. Here's two of the player character models. And this is the archaeologist that we're playing here on the right. There's usually a starting zone, so let's say it starts us over here on the side. And lastly, just to kind of show you, here's all the miniatures in the game. So when a combat happens like this, one side's going to roll for the bad guys, one guy's going to roll for the good guys. It's an initiative value. Whoever wins initiative will go first. Now, there is some behavioral, basic behavioral patterns for melee and range characters, for the enemies in the rule book. And just to show you the rule book, it is, it's got a lot of pages, but the tutorial, you only have to read up to around here, and then you get to actually play the game, and the tutorial will feed you some information and tell you what else to read as you go on, but not too bad. Anyway, so one side's going to go first. In this case, you would get to move up to your stride. So say we had a 4 stride, we can go 1, 2, 3, 4. Diagonals are pretty much one space in this one. And you would get to perform an action. Most of the time, your action is going to be to attack or use an ability and things like that. And when you attack, you're simply going to choose a weapon, like this whip here. This has a range 2, but I just moved up right against him. And you would roll to hit as normal, a percentile dice, plus your might equals or exceeds them. And instead of doing 1 point of damage, obviously like the skirmish, your weapon has a die value over here. It also says if it's 1 or 2 hands and if it's melee or ranged. And you can actually hold 2 weapons. What's neat about this, everybody pretty much can dual wield one-handed weapons. But in order to swing with your second weapon each round, you would have to spend a power point to do so. And also, you do have these abilities, like for instance, this character has Crack the Whip, in which case they can spend a power point down here at the bottom once per round to give another D4 damage on a whip type weapon. So instead of just doing 1d4 with this whip, we would actually do 2d4 plus any damage bonuses and things like that. After all the players have gone, then it's going to be up to the bad guys to go. And you can see that depending on the number of players, they have this many hit points. Depending on the difficulty, they have this much might added to their attacks. You have their defense and their stride, how much lore they're going to give. And what's cool about these cards is there's room for 4 of the same type of monster. You would just put tracking tiles next to this, up to 4 of them, depending on what the story tells you to. And then each one that you kill will give you 20 lore. For each character will get 20 lore and 5 coins. And you can see it has a special ability down here. Now when they roll to hit, there's some behaviors in the book where they're gonna, each bad guy will take an action and they'll move pretty much closest to the, or move to the closest character, enemy character of theirs. Or if it's an archer or something like that, they'll move as far away as possible, but was still within range or line of sight. Now they'll roll to hit as normal, including their might, and it has to equal or exceed your defense. But the single number is going to determine what power they use. You can see here if you roll a 1 to 4, they'll do this ability, a 5 through 7, and an 8 through 10. So this is kind of random. It's not that they will always choose something if somebody's close to them or choose something else if somebody's far away. They'll simply just roll to hit, and then this is the type of power they'll do. That's pretty much the combat. I mean, you're going to move around, do an action. While you're doing this, sometimes you may want to get up close to these search tokens. When you search, you get to roll a d10, and there's a chart in the book that tells you what you receive if you roll high enough. Pretty much if you roll, I think, at 8+, you would get to draw an item from the item deck. And the item deck is massive. I mean, you can see the game comes with a ton of items, and again, I've got probably 10 or 15 of them removed from here because we're in progress of playing the game still with another group. So there's tons of stuff here. Now, what happens if you die in combat? Well, your player character board here will flip over and you become a ghost. And you have basically 10 ghost points, and you would track it with another one of those wheels. And you can see here you have 10 ghost points. You have different values for all this. But you can spend your ghost points, in addition to being hit and taking them as hit points, on these different abilities over here. And they're pretty cool. You can't use these during skirmishes, but during the encounters like this, you can. And if when you're walking around on this map here, If you happen to go to certain cities, or any of the cities actually, there is a general card that shows you all the different things that you can do, and each one of those each city will allow you to do so many services. So if you go to this city here, Austerlink, which is this one up here, you only have one visit to any of these services. These services are also in addition to your personal services that you can do right here in your character booklet. But one of these will allow you to heal yourself, and will also allow you to pay money to bring a character back from ghost form to living. Now, if you are killed while in ghost form, then you go into limbo. You have to go to the caravan at one of the cities to bring the character back to life, but that character is then going to draw a tarot card, and these are very bad. Like, for instance, this one, you have a maximum of 3 power points, where most characters have 5. So that's pretty much the game. One thing else to note is sometimes during the story, it'll give you these story books, and these are just tags basically. So you might get the blue storybook, but you have no clue what it does. But later on in the story, it might say, if you have the blue one, then you're targeted, or if you have the blue one, you get this special item and things like that. So sometimes you're going through and getting these story icons, but you're not really sure what the outcome is. And some other things are the afflictions are let me pull this back over here. Some of the affliction models, instead of having really big models, they have a big token here that you place on the board, and there's some special rules for that as well. And lastly, just to point out, since I will talk about it in a minute, there are some story options in here that will have a player read back here in the this is actually the rule book, in the back, and you'll read these outcomes and everything, but in silence. So you know what's going to happen, or you might know something that's happening to you, and then you can't really tell the other team. When you are ready to stop, though, you can see in the back of the book there is a character progression sheet. Let me flip it over one more. The character progression sheet here, you can write down all your different stats and skills and such like that. And then down here you have all your items that you can write down, or I'm sorry, on the back of this one you have all your items you can write down. And then you have a session log that you actually use every time you play the game. You tell what story it is and what has happened during that game if you want to keep track of everything. And then on the back it has all the encounters and stuff like that. So that's pretty much the game. Let me tell you what I think. And there you go, that's most of the rules to Folklore The Affliction. Now, as a disclaimer, I did receive this as a review copy from Greenbrier Games. Now, I'm going to start off and say, if you're a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, you have to come to this with a little bit of an open mind, because it's still a board game, but it's not fully fleshed out to be an RPG. You know, you're still making decisions based on basically choose this or choose that, and there's a lot of that. And what I like about this game the most is that, unlike other games that are like scenario based, you actually are living the story as you're going through it. It's not like you hear something, you go do all the objectives, and then you're done. You literally are, as you're playing, you move around, it gives you options, move around, gives you more options, things will trigger. Like those storybooks are awesome because you'll get those and they won't take effect until later, but you don't really know what they do. So it's like, I mean, you can't choose to pick it, you get them throughout your actions and stuff, and it's just phenomenal. I mean, the story is awesome. The one thing I will say about the stories, though, is the times that they list is inaccurate, I think. It's usually between 60 and 120 minutes. Every single time it's been over double than that, probably even longer. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because there's a ton of gameplay here, right? You can take one scenario, and it's separated, each, sorry, not scenario, but each story is separated into chapters, and you can stop anytime you want, mark everything down and come back to it like you're saving a game in an RPG on a computer or something. But it's just, man, the story is so awesome. I like the fact that you can have those secret story outcomes that only one player reads, or you got to make a choice, but you don't know what the choices do. So you look at the back of the book after you make your decision if you want to do this or help the old lady or not help the old lady or whatever. So there's a lot of cool interactions. There's just a ton of stuff going on there. And we'll come back to the storybook here in just a minute, but let me talk about some other things. One, the health wheels. Well, I will say this is probably the only massive negative to the game, but it's super easy to circumvent. those wheels are incredibly small as far as the numbers. They're clustered right next to each other. So when you have them on your next to your player board to track your health, the PowerPoint one isn't too bad, but the health wheels, I mean, they're unplayable. You barely touch anything and those things mess up and you're like, what number was I on, right? So we've just been using dice or even those little magic counters from Magic the Gathering, their little wheels with the cutout, you know. It would have been much better if they had something like that, although I know production costs, you know, might be up there. And one thing I didn't show about the game that I was going to get into is the boards that you set up the encounters. There are a ton of them. There's 10 of them and they're all double-sided. I mean, that is a crazy amount of content in this game that can be produced over and over just based on having another story written. So you can basically buy, I would love to see like just a hardbound book of stories, even if they're just using the stuff in the base game, which there are some expansions, obviously, if you check out the Kickstarter. But even in the base game, I mean, you could write story after story, even have like user-created content. I can see this maybe getting a huge following or an underground following of making user-created content. But the world map itself, this is what makes it seem like an RPG as far as like a board game, but man, it really is cool because you're moving around on it. You can choose to go off the path, you know, and you fight harder stuff or whatever, but it's just a super cool thing to move around on, and it has like some weight to it. It's not like it's like, let's go from here to here. It's going to take you 3 days, so draw this many cards. You know, it's like you can move around, you can go to different cities. Between the story or even during a story, if you're supposed to go to one place, you can just move around, and you can't really level up because you don't get lore from those skirmishes, but you can get money and then go back to the city and buy new gear and gear up basically. So you can do a little bit of grinding. If you're familiar with that term from RPGs and MMOs, you can do some grinding and kind of get prepared for the next place. So I thought that was really cool. The miniature tactics, however, I will kind of say that it is slightly weak on the weak side as far as being tactical. Being a War Machine player and a player who's played Dungeons and Dragons a whole lot, you know, there's not as much tactics. It almost seems like you move around, you get to where you're in position with your miniature, and then you kind of just stay there until that thing dies. I mean, there's really no flanking, there's no attacks of opportunities. I mean, I think one of the items has flank, but I mean, as a general rule, there's really nothing that you want to move your miniatures around for. One of the player characters does have some auras, so you might want to stay close to that character. But otherwise, the way the attacks work for the bad guys, which I may have skipped over, but the main characters, when you're fighting in an encounter, they roll a d10, and you basically will choose one of those actions, one of those outcomes, and it happens. So the behavior of the enemies is a little bit weakened because there's really no... you know, it just randomly does an attack. It doesn't select an attack based on where people are and things like that. So that's kind of, it's neat, it's simple, but it could have been a little bit more in depth for me. The skirmishes, however, are awesome because it allows you to fight 100,000 things without the game being a million times longer, right? So you usually will do a few encounters during the story, but you'll do a lot more skirmishes because of how quick they are. And I really like that. That's a really good way to mitigate the time versus, you know, the actual experience. And you just have a lot of fights, or you may not, but I mean, if you're running around on the main map, you might get a lot more in skirmishes than you would if you were just kind of going straight to the stories, right? Straight to the story positions. So I like the skirmishes. They're really, really cool. Anyway, for the most part, I really, really enjoy this game. I mean, the groups I've played it with have really enjoyed it. If you're a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, like I said, you have to come into it and remembering that it's a board game. It's not as fleshed out as a full RPG, but that's not the point of this game. But if you're looking to ever get into an RPG like D&D, I would highly recommend trying this out first, because it does take away the RPG element to it, which is saddening, obviously, if you're an RPGer. But some people don't want to go into that, or maybe they're timid, and this is a great way to break that seal and get people to go into this type of game. So this is a huge thumbs up for me. It's really awesome. I'm looking forward to getting all the expansions. And man, like I said, you could just come out with one storybook and expand this game. It's just so much content there. It was really hard to show everything in the video, so hopefully it gave you an impression of what's going on and what's possible. I didn't want to ruin it with flipping through the pages of the story and have you pause it and see it, but man, so good. Anyway, if you played it or have any comments or questions, comment below and send me an email at timjennette@gmail.com or follow me on social media at the handle below. And check out my podcast, meeplecore.com, or on iTunes or whatever. So, till next time, keep on rocking and rolling dice.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.